Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dead Unicorn, the tabletop role-playing game club. My name is Corey, and I am here with Tarek. Tarek is back after a bit of a hiatus. We promised you that we were going to do a rewrite of Legend of the Five Rings. Give us your comments below. Tell us what you think of this rewrite. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? We'd love to hear from you. And
how would you approach the topics that we were going to touch today?
So me and Tarek, we're going to write in this document over here. We got a document pulled up. And this is a real big rough draft. That's all this is. We're just going to put down our thoughts and maybe we'll refine it later and put it up somewhere. I don't know, maybe on my Patreon. I mean, there's going to be no lore. There's going to be no, we're not referencing the clans. We're just writing rules to make things a bit more streamlined, right? A bit easier.
Yeah, less fluff, more refining the crunch that's there.
Yes, I think the fluff is really great. That's why we come.
Yeah. Yeah, but the fluff is already taken care of. The crunch is where it needs some love.
But isn't that the thing? Isn't there already a bunch of other different rule sets out there we could have just grabbed and played anyways?
Sure, yeah. And if you wanted to just roll back all of your role play sessions from a previous edition or to a previous edition from 5th edition, you are more than welcome to do so. But even then, some of those editions have problems too, and you're going to have to come up with ways to solve that stuff. So why not work with what we got? Try to improve on what's there. Try to incorporate ideas that were solved maybe in the past and see what you can make.
And here's the thing. I want to push us forward. I want to go into the future, right? I want to, these are the books that are on the shelf. You can't really go back and buy the older books.
Yeah, that's true. Unless you're going through just buying all the old PDFs, but there's something special about owning those original books. I used to own all of the old 1st edition and 2nd edition books and most of the 3rd edition, and I lost them all in a move. And it was one of the most tragic moments of my life because I had all the collection of L5R books.
I gotta tell you, 1st edition and 2nd edition are not great editions of Legend of the Five Rings.
No, but they're nostalgic for me.
They lay a good groundwork for the better editions that came after those two editions.
Which, in my opinion, is 3rd edition.
And that's what 5th edition tried to reinvent everything. This edition, this 2018 edition, tried to reinvent the wheel and kind of
in the shape of all Fantasy Flight games too. They tried to reinvent the wheel, but using their own kind of system development ideologies. And it's interesting. I don't mind it. I know some people actually really like the idea of curriculums and building out your character that way. It's a little more coherent in terms of this is my character class and I'm going to level through my character class. It feels kind of like a merging of the class-based and XP-based or skill-based role-playing game designs. But it's a loose marriage at best, and I don't know. It's what we got now, and I think there are ways we could improve on it.
Nothing against the writers of this version of Legend of the Five Rings.
Oh yeah, no,
it's the first. Basically, it's the first version of it. Of this kind. So there's always going to be kind of room for improvement. Before I start though, I want to ask you where your influences are going to be coming from when we do this rewrite. What kind of systems do you like and that you may be pulling from to help revise this?
There are a couple of places that I think have good ideas that I would like to bring forward. One is older editions of L5R. They have some interesting ideas and interesting things that you can easily bring over into this edition. There are some baseline information that kind of propagated over into 5th edition from, I think, 3rd and 4th edition that I think work, including techniques and katas and stuff like that being broken down into different kind of hierarchy of techniques. I think improving on how you balance those techniques versus each other is really important, and I think you can take some information from older editions to inform on that. I also really like Star Wars Saga Edition. I think that has some interesting like ideas that we might be able to bring into this edition of L5R. And of course, since this is a Fantasy Flight game, I think taking inspiration from other Fantasy Flight games and their systems might help us to improve upon the system as well. So, considering they have like a wealth of other, like all the Warhammer 40k games in Fantasy Flight, in the Fantasy Flight vein, potentially could have inspiration that we could bring over here.
The Star Wars Fantasy Flight, because Saga Edition isn't Fantasy Flight, if that were what you were talking about.
No. I mean Saga Edition, Star Wars Saga Edition. I like their way of dealing with like hit points and like wounds and stuff like that better than I like this new system and how it deals with wounds and stuff like that. I think we could hybridize something there. It also had the wound threshold thing, which is like
it did have the threshold thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
To get you to have wounds, and that took you down like a wound chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like the you roll for wounds in the Fantasy Flight version, and the more wounds you get, the harder it is to overcome and
to do things.
Yeah.
That could also be another.
I was thinking about that. So here are some of my influences, and there's going to be two big ones. The first one is 7th C 2nd edition.
Okay, I like it. That's a good one to start out with.
Mainly consequences and opportunity. We already have opportunity in Legend of the Five Rings.
We need
consequences. And the second thing that I want to bring forward is, of course, Cypher System. I love Cypher System, and mainly the NPC system. The way that, NPCs are very simple, but can be very dynamic. And also, the player is always rolling, the player is always interacting, and NPCs are more of a passive thing. And I'd like to bring that to Legend of the Five Rings, because mainly I think it feels bad or wrong when you as a player, like Game Master is just sitting back here rolling dice and being like, well, I rolled a whole bunch of terrible dice at you and you have to take it and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's never a great thing, right?
Yeah. it might be challenging to incorporate more passive NPCs.
I have a way to do
simply
it
because of like how techniques will interact, but I think there's a way forward, and we might be sharing the same brain cell on that idea.
This version of L5R, the newest version, tries to make NPCs a little different than PCs, and making NPCs and PCs kind of work differently. I dig with that, but they don't go far enough. They kind of split the difference, which makes NPCs feel really clunky.
And but out of like otherworldly, yeah.
Yeah, this is what we're going to do. This is the first thing we're going to work on here, are NPCs, right? Yeah. So our goals here, for me, if you look at NPCs in the main book, and let me just bring the main book up here, and we're going to go to non-player characters on page 308. This is not a hyperlinked PDF. How dare they?
I have a hyperlinked PDF. 309 is
309.
308, I guess, is where the chapter starts, but 309 is where the actual.
So, how they do NPCs, and I'll show you like one of these NPCs here. You get a sample NPC, and the first thing they have is a conflict rank. So they show you how well you are against it in physical combat and social interactions.
Combat and intrigue, I believe, right?
Yeah. We have this conflict ranked 4 and 2 on a loyal Bushi. But then these numbers don't mean a goddamn thing. I don't know how they get these numbers. Do you know how they get these numbers? No.
Nope.
Right? And then they have the rings down here and honor, glory, status, endurance, composure, focus, vigilance. My idea. Oh, and then this cool little thing called demeanor, which changes all of their rings depending on d- when it is a social role. So they are assertive. I don't use this rule in the game because I think it's just a lot. It's way too much. Unless you specifically ask and try to use it against them, just ignore it. Because here it gives not +1, but +2 to earth and -2 to air. So people are going to look at that and say, well, I know their demeanor. Yeah, I know their demeanor now. I'm just going to constantly break them on air because apparently loyal Bushis have a 0 in air for social.
Yeah.
Makes no sense. It should be a
loyal
plus.
Bushis do not know how to do anything airy. They just flop on the ground because they're so loyal.
First off, the penalties and the bonus and penalty for that is way too big.
Yeah, and also like how do they get to, like, so the way that they say to make NPCs, like adding an NPC template, right? It seems to me that normally you just grab a couple templates, add those together, there's your character, and then you add a demeanor on top of that. And that gives you your encounter rank, right? Based on whatever the encounter conflict type
the templates say.
Yeah, exactly.
But templates only increase power level. They don't decrease. There's no
decreasing. Yeah, so you're just stacking on a bunch of different things to get this. So, but which ones went into making each NPC? Do we know?
No.
Do we know if this is a loyal Bushi who is an artist and a warrior combined? Like what are the things that came together to make this character? We have no.
There's no way to make NPCs. There's no rules for that except in the Shadowlands books for making Oni.
Yeah, but it's just very sloppy in terms of like there's not a clear way to push this forward.
So here's my solution. You see where they have all of those rings and endurance and composure and focus and all of that stuff? You get rid of it. All of it goes away. What we do for NPCs is we give NPCs only a conflict rank and a political rank.
Like intrigue? You have your conflict and intrigue?
Conflict and intrigue rank. Yeah, intrigue rank. That's what it is. Intrigue rank. Right? When a player interacts with with that NPC, their TNs equal their rank in that category. Easy peasy, right? Now, each NPC also has a demeanor and a physicality. So I'm expanding on the demeanor.
Yeah.
So I'm basically...
You can modify them. Yeah.
Yeah. So these modify the conflict, the intrigue and conflict rank, and conflict rank when using certain rings. Right? So now it's like, now you can see everything is mainly just this number unless it's these certain physicality, like wiry or rugged or any of those words. Right?
It feels more like, like you have descriptors at that point that you can attach to them that will modify them in some way that's fitting for the character as a descriptor of who they might be. Beyond just like, this is loyal Bushi number 2, this is now Akodo Hirotsugu, and he is assertive and rugged, as he is one of the head scouts of the Lion Clan. Boom. And you got a whole thing. He's got a 5 in conflict. His rugged gives him a bonus to that in earthy, like using Earth Ring. rolls to survive.
Right.
So he is more hardy and harder to take down when making like tests against critical strikes. Yeah, I think that works. The only thing that worries me is that social checks might get, like social and conflict checks might get either more challenging or way easier depending. But I don't know that that's really a problem. I'm not sure that would be a problem, because that would take more like play testing to kind of figure out the like what's a good rating to give. You know what I mean?
So there's a couple things. There's a couple gaps here. Like first off, like skills, I'm not sure how to put those,
to make those
in,
work,
or if they even freaking matter for an NPC. Like
or
it's
techniques.
an NPC.
Like if they're using a technique, do you then, instead of worrying about making the technique apply all of the same rules as the techniques do for PCs, or do you just give the PC a chance to resist the technique with a check based on one of those?
That's exactly right, Tarek. You have read my mind. Basically, NPC techniques are counted as consequences.
Yeah.
So a PC can use their role to negate a NPC's tech the same way they would negate a consequence. Now, how I would want to do consequences, and this is getting a little ahead of myself because I want to do like opportunity. We want to change opportunities and that sort of thing. But whereas opportunities can only be used with an opportunity symbol, I want consequences to be negated with either extra bonus successes or opportunity. So you can basically use anything to negate consequences.
And I would say also have strife contribute to triggering consequences.
Triggering consequences? Yeah, that could be something too. Strife, instead of consequences happening because you
or only happening because of like a trigger from something else. Yeah, instead of it just happening because an NPC triggers something, you can have a consequence trigger because you kept a certain amount of, like, almost like, you know how if you keep a certain amount of strife while casting a spell, you get a spiritual backlash?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if when you do this awesome, technique to cut one of the enemy's heads off, you do that, but you keep a number of strife equal to a certain threshold, and now a consequence spawns because of it.
So I'm going to and consequences, and we'll write these concurrently because why not? We're just writing down all of our thoughts, like I said, right?
Yeah,
we're just getting everything kind of out there.
Yeah.
Opportunities and consequences. So opportunities are things you can spend opportunity symbols on. Consequences are activated with what do they call it?
By NPC techniques, I'd say, and
consequences are activated with strife symbols kept on dice.
Yeah.
And consequences. So
I'd say also consequences can be imposed by NPCs, like by like an NPC can impose a consequence by using a technique or whatever. Those are considered consequences, but there are also consequences that can be triggered by you keeping strife, and those would be more like story element consequences, right? So in the example that I gave before, like you attack an NPC and you kill, let's say you cut their head off. Well, that could spur somebody else who's an onlooker now choosing to intervene on behalf of the person you just killed. and there's a consequence that has developed. Or maybe somebody sees what you did and they become they may not attack you outright immediately, but they become an enemy of you going into the future because of the strife you took while making that success. You know what I mean? Those could be interesting consequences that can develop and make story elements and narrative elements.
How about instead of calling these consequences, we call these complications?
I like it. Actually,
complications can be overcome with bonus successes or opportunities.
Yeah.
Opportunity symbols. Yeah, so now we have three different things that are done a little differently. Strife gives you consequences. There are opportunities that you can get. Strife can give you consequences, and complications are things that are kind of in the plot, in the part of the game that are there that can be overcome with bonus successes or opportunity. Because everybody's got those bonus successes or opportunities that just kind of hang on. And that
are just there.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, like, I guess.
There's not much I can do with this.
Yeah.
Let me look through the book for 20 minutes to figure out what kind of opportunities I want to spend this on. And this way, it's much easier. There's much more direct things that you can spend them on that are more immediately valuable than something more esoteric that you pull out of a book.
Also, for opportunities, I'd like a list, a condensed list of things any player can do on any ring, but depending on their ring, they get an opportunity discount. So basically, like, you know how on water stance you can spend opportunity to move an extra range band?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then now you can use an opportunity to move an extra range band on all stances, but it costs 2 on any stance except water, and it'll cost 1 on water.
I like that.
Yeah. That way
That's more coherent system.
That way people are like, well, what does water do compared to air, compared to this? Everything does the exact same thing. We all know we can have that little list, and it's just the discount that changes.
Yeah. I really like that idea. I also think that you can simplify a lot of the techniques out by generalizing them into anyone can take them. Same thing with like I want to do the calming breath, but heal back 2 instead of 1. I think there's one of those as an opportunity as well. Same thing applies. Mm-hmm. You can do that any ring, but it's cheaper to do on a certain stance.
I think it's water stance again.
As well. I think that's a great bonus, and it also makes things like fire stance and void stance more consequential, right? Because if you're going to take a bunch of strife to do something really big and like emboldened on fire stance, you're also risking taking some kind of consequence. Right? And then if you're on void stance, you're less likely to do something big and impressive, but you're mitigating any chances at taking and developing consequences as a result. You're trying to like balance that karma out.
Here's the thing, is it because I think with backlash, it just has to be on the dice. It doesn't have to be taken strife. It's just kept dice with that symbol on it. So is that what we want to do?
True.
Do we want to do, kept strife, or strife, you kept a die with that strife symbol on it? And I'd rather do the latter.
Question. I think so. It just then what? I guess
we can.
Void still has the added benefit of not affecting your actual composure and endurance, but it does still affect whether you have consequences or opportunities from that roll.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Okay. So we've kind of talked about opportunities and complications and consequences a little bit. We kind of got that kind of straight. Let's go back to NPCs. So techniques are counted as consequences, right?
Do we want to call them consequences now, or is it actually complications? Because complications are what are overcome with bonus success and opportunity, which I think you were talking about before with
Counted as
consequences. So I think
consequences or complications.
okay,
We'll we'll see. Like I think a consequence might be like some opportunities out there might be consequences or things that are counted as opportunities. Like doing a critical strike
yeah,
might be now a consequence, whereas a technique that they have might be a complication.
yeah, that's true. I like that.
I don't know. This is something we're gonna have to play test or feel
Because
out.
I like the idea that if I have overextended myself by taking a bunch of strife on a check, that leaves me open to something like a critical strike. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
I think that makes sense logically because that's like you're naturally overextending your body, or even things like taking extra fatigue from that check because you went too far and left yourself open to an attack, a
And we can
counterattack, or
change
whatever.
Earth stance to be,
Yeah.
hey, instead of you can't take critical. I've never liked the you just don't take critical strikes or anything like
Yeah,
that.
you can't. Somebody can't spend opportunity against you. Anyway,
That's I think that's a little silly. I thought it should have
yeah,
been more like, oh, to get critical strikes on you should be an a
an
more
increase. Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah,
Yeah, you just have to spend an
mhm,
extra opportunity. But maybe, hey, if you're on Earth stance, either it's harder for you to take consequences, or you just don't take consequences. Consequences don't matter on Earth stance.
I think the other one is better. It's harder for you to develop consequences.
Or
Um,
easy for you to mitigate them.
yeah,
So
exactly. You can like you subtract almost like air ring. You know how air ring actually has two bonuses. It has the first bonus of when you're only when you're below level four, rank four, you get plus one TN, and when you're above rank four or above, you get two.
mhm.
I think that would be a good way of going about modifying the other ones. Like on Earth Stance, if you're below rank four, you can reduce the number of or like increase the number of strife you can take before you incur a consequence by one, and then at rank four above, it's by two, right? So it's
Interesting.
progressively harder to do it. And then maybe on Void Stance, you can negate a consequence, or maybe successes or
I
opportunities you need to spend
I think
to
I
beat
think
out a complication.
I think just negating strife is powerful enough for Void. Just be like,
Okay,
I really
yeah,
do.
that's fair.
But
Okay,
Earth stance is pretty broken.
yeah,
That
it
I
is.
think that's the only one that's kind of broken. Everything else works, but Earth stance. Um, either make uh consequences harder to affect you or negate them completely. All right, back to NPCs. So we have this thing where NPCs are just boiled down to two numbers: a conflict rank and an intrigue rank, and then that's modified by a physicality and demeanor. Boom, boom. Right now we've taken a giant, a giant thing, and we've shrunken it, whoop, down to this. So here's my next thing: do NPCs have endurance and composure? And
I want to say yes, and the reason why is because we still need a measure of how long they can stay in an encounter.
I but we can just change like endurance to just be like hit points for like when minions just run out of endurance, they fall down and they're gone.
Yeah.
And the only thing that uses that complicated wound system is an adversary.
Yes. Well, this is what I'm saying. We need a way to track how long they're in an encounter, right?
That is true.
So if it is a like a minion on either either conflict type, then it's just their rank. If they take enough wounds, quote unquote, in a conflict, equal to their conflict rank. So if it's combat or intrigue, whatever their number there is, once they've hit that many fatigue, basically that many wounds, they're out. They fold like a Dorito. If it's an adversary, then maybe it's double that rank. So if they have a conflict of 5, then you got to do 10 wounds to them effectively before they're considered incapacitated out of that conflict. And that gives them a duration of time that they are going to be active in an encounter, whether that's a conflict, whether that's a combat encounter or an intrigue encounter.
So here's the thing: do NPCs take critical hits? I think, or actual wounds. And what I'd like to do personally, I'm like, get rid of endurance and replace everything with wounds for NPCs. Because when somebody attacks an NPC and they say, oh, I just take this many fatigue, and you actually didn't hit them, that doesn't feel as good. So
keeping that for the players and removing it for the NPCs to say, if they get hurt in a conflict, they take direct damage. So how does that work in an intrigue is my question.
Players get fatigue, but NPCs don't. They simply just take wounds. Right?
Yeah. I like that idea.
We treat NPCs and players a little differently, sure, but it facilitates the fun of the game.
And it can make things way more tense in certain situations. Like if you're trying to protect an NPC and they're taking wounds, they're actually taking damage.
Right.
Then it makes them feel like you have to do a little bit more to protect them.
How do we do strife? That is an interesting question that I haven't given as much thought to. But maybe strife is fine?
Maybe strife is wounds too, though. Maybe that's just like emotional wounds in a sense.
Emotional damage.
Yeah, you're doing direct emotional damage to the NPC. Because, or like, instead of critical strikes in that same sense, we can take the momentum system that they were trying to build up in a social conflict, right? And instead of dealing critical wounds, you're gaining momentum, and that's their health bar. The more momentum you get, the more you're against an NPC, the more likely they are to then leave the encounter. That gives them the pathway out of the encounter. So you can outmaneuver them in a courtly situation. You can overstress them so that they are no longer effective as a negotiator or whatever in that encounter, and that becomes their gauge for social wounds in that sense. So, because 7C used to have a social wounding system. I don't know if you remember that. They had physical wounds and then social wounds that you could take, and social wounds were just as devastating as physical wounds in first edition 7C.
So I'm always on the side of making things easier, not more complicated. If I were to make like a stress system, I would say you're either stressed or you're not stressed. One or the other. There's no points to get there or anything like that. Something happened to make you stressed, you're now stressed. If you take a second to get unstressed, you unstress yourself. But I also get the idea that there could be a point and a threshold to get to, and once you go past that, it gets
once you pop, you just can't stop. Yeah.
Right. So
I prefer gradient there, to be honest, just because otherwise it could feel like people are popping off way too quickly. Like, I'm going to do something to stress you out. You're going to take a turn to unstress. I'm going to take a turn to stress you out again. You're going to take a turn to unstress. And it feels like that's triggering way too quickly. So having a small gradient there's
another Fantasy Flight game. It's a board game this time called Star Wars. I think it's just called X-Wing. Star Wars X-Wing. And what they do in it is you can either be just stressed or unstressed. But you don't take a turn to be unstressed. So what you can do is you can do a technique or push your plane kind of past its limit to become stressed. And once you become stressed, all of those maneuvers, like a bunch of other maneuvers now that caused you to become stressed, you can't use anymore because you can't.
You
So a
became
bunch of stuff
stressed.
you can't use. If you use normal techniques, normal movement, it does not unstress you. But then there are things that are a bunch of techniques and abilities and movement that if you move like this or do this, it unstresses you. So there could be unstress techniques. But I think that's going too far outside of, like, I think we're changing the game too much and it becomes something way different
Yeah,
if we do that.
it does become something different. Yeah.
So I think we're keeping strife the same.
Okay.
I think we're keeping strife the same. Endurance, we're gonna have to change into some sort of more wound system, right? No matter what,
Yeah.
the NPCs are taking wounds because otherwise it just doesn't
It
feel
could
great.
be. It could also just be down to like I don't mind wounds, and I don't mind like if you take a critical strike, like minion, like you were doing before. If they take any sort of strike, it becomes they just go down. I do not mind. I really am a fan of running L5R in a Chanbara way, where it's like all of the low level NPCs that are kind of meaningless and just there that are in the way. One hit, one drop, done.
Yeah. Oh,
You're a PC. That why does it matter if they're not there to be like an actual impediment to you? Let them just be a nacho Dorito that just gets chomped down each bite. You got one. But if they are an adversary, then you need to actually do a critical strike, or they maybe can absorb a certain number of critical strikes before they go down. And that could just be as simple as saying, if they take a critical strike with a certain severity level, they're dropped.
I kind of like your idea of the Star Wars Saga Edition threshold, which means if
Yeah,
they take X amount of damage, their threshold breaks and they take a critical strike, which
critical
means like
strike.
maybe adversaries have endurance, but it's not actually endurance, it's just a threshold. So
Yeah,
players roll to hit, they hit that, they take that damage, and as soon as their endurance, if you do a hit that makes their endurance, their
that goes
fatigue go
past
over
their
their
endurance.
endurance, it's an instant critical hit, and the players can like roll to see what kind of critical damage that NPC takes, and then their endurance goes back to zero, their fatigue goes back to zero, and you have to do that damage again to do the next threshold hit.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's good. And you can because of how their critical strike system works in base. If they didn't already roll to do a critical strike specifically, right? Then the NPC just takes a regular base critical strike, which is the whatever the severity of the deadliness of your weapon is becomes the severity. They take that as the critical strike. That most likely is going to be something that's not going to be super debilitating to them initially, because most weapons are like a 4
Mm-hmm.
or a 5 at most. Um, but if you've done that 2 or 3 times, now they're just going up the severity chart, the deadliness chart, until it becomes a deadly thing where they just die.
We do need to
I think
take on
that's smart.
wounds, and I think I do like Fantasy Flight's Star Wars version of wounds, where like the first critical hit you take isn't going to be as big, but you, like, let's say every time that threshold breaks and that NPC takes another one and another one, like the die roll that you roll on the chart gets plus five again. Plus, so like if he's taken 3, it's a plus 15, and that, or even a plus 10. I don't know. I don't know how we're making this chart, but
Yeah, that could be death already. I like that. I actually really like that. That simplifies things a lot.
so yeah. So it's like you roll a,
So if you're using a weapon that's really already deadly, like let's say you're wielding a fucking naginata, which are like some of the most high deadliness weapons in the game, and you intentionally land a critical strike, well, you're already going to have a pretty good chance of debilitating an NPC, regardless of whether they're a minion or an adversary. So rules as written, you just roll your critical strike. If you hit a critical strike, roll your severity. You know, we calculate your severity. He takes the critical strike. If that is a killing blow, okay, there's a critical strike of a killing blow. But if you're just nickel and diming NPCs with like hits to take out their endurance, or you're not capable of hitting their AC, because let's say their TN to be hit is equal to their critical strike or their combat rating, right? Let's say they have a 5 combat rating. Hitting 5 successes and 2 opportunities to get a critical strike is going to be nearly impossible for most PCs forever in the game until they're really high ranking. So being able to nickel and dime them and break their endurance threshold means that you can actually balance that fight with a certain number of PCs, and it will be workable, right? All they need to focus on is getting hits and breaking that endurance threshold every time. And once they've done that a couple times, then there's a really high likelihood that they'll just kill the guy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a smart way of looking at this, and I think that could potentially make this a really doable.
And it frees up opportunity to do other cool things.
I agree.
Moving around the board more,
placement,
doing techniques, getting rid of those consequences or complications.
Those countering techniques that the enemy is going to use. Yeah, I like that.
Exactly. And I think, like, in 7C, they encourage you to make more opportunities. Like, opportunities are rare, but, like, put stuff in a scene that could be an opportunity.
Like, hit the chandelier that comes down and crashes onto the noble, or, like, the noble's bodyguards or whatever, as you're making your daring escape. Or
you see something interesting on an NPC right in front of you, like there's a note stuck in their obi, and you can snatch it with 2 opportunity or something like that. Now you have their note.
Exactly. Or even just like terrain in the battlefield, like making sure that you can navigate the terrain.
I think terrain is 100% complications or consequences.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? It's like you're in the dangerous terrain of fire. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead of if you only take strife, you take damage. No. You got to spend opportunity not to take damage. You're in the poop right now. You got to get yourself out of the poop.
Exactly. Until you get out of the fire, which means if you're trying to fight somebody who's in there, or rescue somebody who's in there, you're going to need to be planning out how you're making your skill checks and what you're spending your opportunity on. Otherwise, you could go down and your friend can go down with you. Yeah.
Speaking of skill checks, NPCs and skills, I think we're in agreement that NPCs don't need skills.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
It's up to the GM. It's up to the GM to use discretion on what you think they would be good or bad at. If you need to modify whether they're going to be like, this is a super honorable guy, why does he have super high like skullduggery to be able to be sneaking around or whatever? As long as you're playing your NPC with the mindset of those demeanors and physicalities, and like the type of NPC you're making, I don't think it's a problem.
So I kind of want to replace these kind of skills with advantages and disadvantages. Keep advantages and different advantages the same. So like if an NPC has keep advantages and disadvantages, but they keep advantages and disadvantages, and so that way when a player rolls against them, if they have an advantage, it works like a disadvantage against the player, and they have to re-roll 2 successes. If they have a disadvantage, the player can re-roll 2 dice. But
re-roll two failures to try to get success.
The player. Yeah. So an advantage makes a player re-roll
2 successes.
2 successes. But a disadvantage allows a player
to re-roll 2 failures.
Player to re-roll any 2 dice.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
I think that's good.
And that should take the place of skills too.
That should help to define the character, I think. Yeah.
Place of skills and help Define the NPC.
Yeah. So I think with the demeanor, physicality, advantage, and disadvantage, you should have a pretty well described character. And then their conflict ranks will give you their competencies at any specific type of encounter they might have with a PC. And those are only really necessary if you're going to be having an encounter with a PC, right? If you're going to have a social encounter, you're going to need to at least make sure that you have their intrigue rating set. If they're going to be having a combat encounter, you at least need to make sure that they have their conflict rating set to a specific value. And then you can pretty much handle any type of encounter you have, giving them that rating as a baseline for what a PC needs to roll in order to affect them or defend against them.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
It makes them kind of predictable, but you can change up that predictability by giving them interesting demeanors, physicalities, advantages, and disadvantages, because that will change kind of how a PC can interact with them. If they think, oh, I can jump and use my water techniques against this guy because I'm real cool, and they end up using the water technique and find out that they are aligned with, fire better, and they get bonuses against people who are water-based techniques, then that adds a layer of complexity and depth to the system that breaks apart that predictability. And I like that. Because that takes kind of trial and error or very keen observations to be able to navigate ahead of time. So if you're tactical, you can set the predictability for your PC. And if you just go headlong and start going through, you might have a bit of trouble because you don't know exactly what kind of person you're dealing with yet. I like that. I think that adds depth to this.
I think we've got NPCs pretty well defined. There's only one thing I think we messed up a little bit, and I've just noticed it now. So here's the thing. If we get rid of endurance for some NPCs, for minions basically, and they just take wounds, how does armor help a minion?
Armor allows a minion... Actually, I would say armor does not matter for most minions.
They just have it because it's, fashionable.
They have it, and that is simply... And most of the time, a minion should be wearing something simple like Ashigaru armor. Why would a minion be having full-on heavy, Kabuto?
Well, there should be levels of minion too. Like if the emperor sitting there on his throne, he's the adversary, and suddenly like his honor guard, they're all his minions. Could they just be minion level since the big threat is the emperor and the
So what they did with this in original 7C was you had minion with a rating on it. So like a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and that was how many dramatic wounds you had to do to the minion in order to dispatch it. So the majority of base level was just 1. If you did a single attack, basically, they drop. And I think that's a smart way to keep it. If you're fighting Ashigaru in the field, or basic low-level samurai in the field, one wound should do it. Especially considering you're not expected to just kill people. Like, you should be able to knock them out with a single blow and put them out of the fight for a while. And then if they're more complex enemies, then you can give them a rating equal to maybe their conflict rank. They need to take 1, 2, 3 hits before they go down.
And you think armor would give them like an extra hit, maybe?
Yeah, and
armor just doesn't matter, and it's just that's their rank. How many hits they can take before they just go down.
Mm-hmm. That's more, in my opinion, more telegraphing how challenging of an enemy you have. The nicer equipment they're wearing.
This is something I want to point out to you about this kind of way to go. So when you're doing damage with a weapon, you can use bonus successes to increase that damage the weapon is doing. And that works fine when we're talking about our new adversary rules and that threshold you have to hit to make them take a hit. Does that work on minions? How many bonus successes do you need to take to make them take 2 hits?
So again, if we're looking at other systems that have done this kind of Chanbara style, we can draw inspiration of it. Because there were, if you did raises, a certain number of raises in 7th First Edition, you could do multiple strikes against a minion, and that would take out, if it was a tier 2 minion, and you took 2 raises on top of your initial attack, you could take them out in a single attack. Which I think we can draw over by saying maybe for like every 2 opportunities, because you have to think about it in terms of what's your average dice
I would make it bonus
rating.
successes, not opportunities. Bonus successes are the things that do more damage.
Okay, same difference. That you look at your base rating of attack, right? If you have a 3 in a ring and a 3 in a skill, you're pretty damn good at doing that thing. But you're still on average only going to be looking at maybe like 2 to 3 successes per attack. So having 2 bonus successes on top of a tier 2 opponent, let's say, is going to be pretty challenging, because that means you have to get 4 successes on 3v3, which is going to be a challenge. Without getting an explosive success or something along the way, you're probably, or spending a void, you're probably not going to drop them immediately. But having the opportunity to get extra bonus successes to do that could work. But I'd say it needs to be at least 2 bonus successes per additional tier of damage.
So here's the thing. Do we want to keep the... and this is, I guess this is going a little off topic, but you brought it up as an example. It takes 2 successes to hit anything. Do we want to just change that, since it's just like you have to, since everything's based off conflict rank, it's just the conflict rank is their TN now? Because no one has to roll two successes to hit you anymore. Now he's attacking, and to defend yourself, it's the conflict rank. And to hit them, it's the conflict rank.
That makes sense. But does that inhibit people from ever really hitting somebody who's an effective NPC at combat?
I don't know.
Because 5, if you have a 5 in a conflict rating as an NPC, that's probably a good challenge for a group of 5 adventurers who are all rank 1.
But here's the thing.
Adds up to 5, right?
Here's the thing. Can
a rank 1 character hit that?
But also at the same time, can an NPC go on a stance? I don't think they can. Look, if NPCs don't roll, what does Void Stance do? Right? If NPCs don't take consequences or complications, what does Earth Stance do? NPCs can't take a stance?
True, and that also means, what does Air Stance do for you too? Because if they're not making a check to attack you, you're making a check to defend. Does it just add to your defense check against their techniques?
Yeah, maybe.
So just say your roll is whatever their conflict rank is, -1 if you're below level 4, or -2 if you're above level 4 or above.
Personally, like, how do you even, like, if no NPC has school ranks. If you ever looked at an NPC for school ranks. And so, like, how does an NPC in this game, as it is right now, use Air Stance?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I just been looking at their conflict rank and making that their school rank as well.
Yeah. And also techniques. How do they develop techniques if they don't have school ranks?
Oh. Usually most NPCs just have 1 or 2 techniques. And it doesn't matter how, like, their conflict or social rank is. It's just there's 1 or 2 techniques. And sometimes those techniques are insanely powerful and sometimes they're not. But it doesn't seem to change their conflict rank.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to have an effect on that.
For example...
so there's still some pieces that we're going to need to work through.
There are.
These are excellent questions. I say we plan another session, take some time to think about how we want to resolve these edge cases, because these are going to be core edge cases
And we'll have
that will
time
come up
for
often
our fans, the people who watch this
to
video,
come
to
comment. Yeah.
chime in and tell us what they would do if they think we're going on the right track here, if they think we're way off base, or if they like what we're doing but think this or that or these might be the way to solve these problems that we're having.
I agree. I think that's a great idea. Give us your thoughts. Share it with us. Join our Discord. Jump on the comments of this video. Let us know what you think. Please, we want to try to make this better for everybody as a community. So we are all ears for ideas and opportunities to make things better.
I think we've got a good start here. All right. Well then, I think we'll wrap it up. From myself and Tarek, go roll some dice.